Hey guys, Akiba back for the first episode of what I'm really excited to tell you guys is going to be our SlateAsia podcast. With me, my new co-host, Jason Fang from Sora Ventures. We are super excited. We're going to run the intro and then we're going to get straight into what's going on in the Asian markets, so the fallout from FTX, how it's affected investors in Asia, and just a general sort of overview over to the Asian markets. Super excited about this and it's going to be really fun. Catch you guys in a second. Boom. Okay, I was just saying to Jason that we do need a new stinger for the SlateAsia podcast, but it's a brand new podcast. Super excited to be here with you, Jason. Jason, last time we spoke was pre-FTX. Lots of things have changed. One of the things that I remember you saying, which I think was really interesting, I want to really start on, is you said that you felt that Asian markets would be leading crypto when Bitcoin went below 18K. Up until that point, you felt that was a strong support. We've obviously broken that down now. I think we had a little bit of a pump this morning up to 16.5. But do you think this is now playing out? Are Asian markets now in control, do you feel?
I still feel that there's going to be some time for sure. But what we've seen is that obviously the collapse of FTX has really affected a lot of speculators and investors in the Asian market. And you look at the list, Korea being number one, Singapore being number two. I think there's a couple not mentioned, but Hong Kong used to be one of the headquarters of FTX before they moved to Bahamas. So who knows how many people are affected in Hong Kong. They also own the company called Genesis Block, which FTX acquired, but they're like basically in a Bitcoin ATM, one of the largest in Asia, also headquartered in Hong Kong. So I'm sure there are a lot of people being affected. Taiwan as well. Taiwan, more people were being affected by FTX collapse than the Lehman Brothers in 2008. And so obviously, I think a lot of people have seen the effect on how one single exchange has basically forced regulators to rethink the strategy on how to really regulate this industry. Right? I mean, they put a lot of effort in doing this, Singapore especially. And even after all that work, it seems like there is still a lot of, basically space to improve. And so I think moving forward, you're definitely going to see such transition where regulators will work very closely with, our industry to see how we can fully regulate. And in this sense, I think Asia will actually move faster than the US potentially, because obviously they had the most victims.
Yeah, I mean, it's the interesting thing because you obviously FTX.US was the US side, with SBF being in the state. Well, he's in Bahamas now, but people do think of it as a US company, but that wasn't where most people are affected because most people in the US couldn't even use FTX.com. So
right. So I think if you look at the market right now, what's really interesting is there are investors in Asia that are starting to look at the equity space. If you look at the tech equities, right? Equity in especially the Chinese tech, they've dropped 80%, 90% all-time low, and we're starting to see a bounce where people are starting to look at potentially picking up some deals there. It's very similar to Bitcoin as well. Even though Bitcoin, there's arguments to be made that Bitcoin might drop another 20% or 30%. It is relatively low and is very much in line with what we're seeing with other investors looking to invest in the tech space in Asia. The trend,
right. The 10 cents had quite a bit of a bounce since the
that's
end
right.
of October, for instance, hasn't it?
That's right, and not just Tencent, but basically a lot of the similar products in tech in Asia has had quite a bit of bounce.
So, what do you think though to the fact that you talk about our industry, and I think it's an interesting point that I've been talking about with some of the journalists, is that for me, one of the key aspects of 2022 is that the pain in the crypto markets hasn't been led by any failure in blockchain. If you want to take the core underlying technology, like Luna, bad tokenomics, there wasn't like a hack of Luna. It was the human input as to how they thought the algorithm would work that failed after a bit of a bank run. FTX, Celsius, BlockFi, poor risk management or zero risk management.
Right.
So it's not really a Web3 problem. It's either it can be, for me, it's either a Web2 problem, or more accurately, it's a human problem. Is this something that you think is this understood in the Asian markets? Because popular media in the West is certainly not understanding that. They're talking about the death of crypto, and I'm looking at it going, well, with FTX, there was no they accepted crypto deposits. Then after that, you were just trading on a Web2 portal that was completely irrelevant of actually how much you had, because they'd given it all to Alameda or whatever. So you weren't doing crypto trading on FTX. You were doing fake order book trading, arguably.
Right. Yeah. I'll take a step back from here, because I feel like this is something that people don't tend to miss out, which is, even though our industry has been around for a long time, there still is not many big players around. You think about it, there's not that many people there's not that many companies that are really actually value $1 billion or above. Yes, there's a lot of crypto tokens that are worth well over $1 billion, but and if you compare that to the equity market, a lot of that is like, is fake money, right? If you're properly doing an audit, you should probably do some discount around the actual value of the tokens.
Yeah, because it's unrealized, you mean?
Right, exactly. And so if you're like trying to bring traditional Web 2 or just financial instrument into a Web 2, 3 industry, which is still very, very early, you're really only working with a handful of individuals here, a handful of parties here, that even have that amount of capital to be working with you, right? So we're still in a very, very early stage, and I think a lot of times it's not just companies making mistakes and the risk management side, but it's also if you're trying to scale, right? They're trying to scale their business, you're trying to improve, and they're trying to increase, and they also have they also have pressure from the investors. But the problem is, if there's not enough big players in the industry, then you're really forced to only work with a couple here. And so if one of these couples are bad actors, in this case, so for example, FTX, then a lot of all the counterparties will also get hit, right? So that's what we've seen in this for me is very obvious, because for Asian funds, we don't tend to have the same amount of capital to invest in very large check size as well as high valuation. But in US, we've seen that, and the consequence of that is you might lose a big chunk of that, because you're investing with other key players like FTX. So that's one point. The second point is, even though I think a lot of people like to invest in the technology, the infrastructure around, and this is especially true in the US, in our industry. In Asia, it's more about the money flow. It's more about the money supply, right? So I think, one thing that I think a lot of people have been very excited about is the digital RMB for sure. But digital RMB has been around, in 2016, as early as 2016, right? As early as 2016, there were articles that said China was looking to explore, leveraging blockchain for the digital RMB. It's been almost close to 10 years now, and we still haven't seen like the actual launch of it. Will we see it in like 2026? Maybe not, right? And I think it's very hard to do it, but I think the government understands that this is very, very powerful technology, and once they do release it, when it's ready, you're going to see a huge impact on money, like just money supply moving, just money increasing, and that's going to increase GDP. That's going to increase transaction. It's going to increase how people do business around Asia. It's going to increase on how trades are being done in Asia. There's almost as I think that's the part that we're basically waiting for. I think because that part is, in my opinion, that is where the next big movement is going to be in the Asian market.
You mentioned the last time we spoke that what the Asian markets are really good at is horizontal scaling rather than innovation. Do you think that's maybe part of it? That it's looking to see how that technology can be implemented elsewhere before, like so like not wanting to be the first because that's not part of the trend in terms of the usual way that technology goes?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand that most countries in Asia are relatively centralized or run by relatively centralized government, right? And so that comes, centralized government means that hey, if I'm launching something as powerful as blockchain, and power like blockchain payment is very very powerful. I think we can all agree here. As something as if as powerful as blockchain, if you do it right, then obviously it's great for the government. If you do it wrong, then it could go really really bad, right? And
Mm.
so that's why they're spending a lot of time, um, you know, learning from existing case studies from mostly from the from the West. They're seeing how other companies are the collapse of Luna, the collapse of FTX, how they have affected people around the world, how it's affected government, how it's affected regulators. So they're taking the time to learn, right? And I think it will be a while until they launch it, but I think this is generally a good sign because every time there's a mistake to be made, there's lesson to be learned,
Hmm.
and that is one step closer to actually launching it, because then now people will be like, okay, now there's case study to kind of like
Hmm.
there's case studies to kind of learn from it, and then we can try to implement some of the things that so we can avoid these problems.
So Russia recently started talking about the need for like a global reserve currency that's backed by blockchain. Has that stirred up any response in relation to this within the Asian markets?
I think every country will start doing that. I think it's just a matter of time that every country will do it. I think that's the future for sure. I mean, if you take a step back and just look at the biggest winners in this crypto space until from the birth of Bitcoin until now, right? The biggest winner is not just investors ourselves, but it's the fiat, it's the USD. Specifically, it's the USD, right? Everything in our market is denominated in USD. More people are
Hmm.
using USD today. It's a lot easier to access USD today, um, and for that reason, USD has become much stronger as a currency worldwide. Right now, imagine now, if RMB became something of a similar product like what we see in USD today, right? Imagine every country launch something very similar where the framework is very similar, but then obviously they have to figure out the uh, how that's going to align with their own financial system, right? Because every country has their own different form of system that they run on. Like China is run on
Hmm.
purely on like Alipay and WeChat Pay, two centralized system, right? Every country is different, but that's the part that the government needs to figure out. But I think a lot of people today realize that the framework works, and they see that this is something that's very very powerful. Once they figure it out, I think every country that utilize it will end up benefiting a lot from all the products that we see in crypto today.
So has there, you mentioned briefly around regulatory sort of oversight following FTX. Has there been any sort of immediate increase in regulatory conversations in Asia after the FTX fallout? Or is it just a slightly bit more of a awareness that exchanges probably need to be better regulated?
100%, I think for sure. I mean, if you look at every major country in Asia, regulators have typically taken extreme measures to one to figure out what the damage was, how to improve. Um, you know, if you look at, for example, Japan, right? FTX, they bought Liquid, right?
Hmm.
And before that, Liquid was one of the top exchanges in Japan for a long time. And so, imagine that exchange that a lot of people trust and use for a long time now is just completely gone, right? Money stuck in there, you can't move out. I mean,
Mm.
obviously, there's a lot of trust going on, and people try to really figure out, do we really want a foreign entity to be managing our, our domestic money, right? That's a
Hmm.
question I think moving forward. People will think there's certain countries that does that. No, like for example, Koreans. Koreans are a very very unique culture too, right? I mean, if you're a foreigner, you're non-Korean, try to run a Korean exchange is very difficult, very very difficult.
Hmm.
And I think for good reasons, of course. The similar things that we're seeing right now is, if you're Singaporean, you're running some Singaporean exchange. Would you rather value more on who's running it versus the liquidity in the exchange, right? I mean, from the FTX case, we've seen that liquidity can be made out of thin air,
Yeah.
right? So historically, I think a lot of people, especially traders, speculators, when they trade on exchanges, they look at liquidity, right? We trade on exchanges, and some exchanges have really like poor product on the user experience, but we trade on there because there's liquidity. After FTX, I think investors, traders will start to reevaluate the legitimacy and the value of what is the most important thing in exchange, right? I think as traders, we're already thinking about that. So I'm sure the governments will think the same way.
Yeah.
We've seen that. We've seen that for sure.
And for me, it's just real. I mean, I mentioned it previously about the difference between kind of crypto and exchanges. Although it might be a crypto exchange, this whole incident has definitely made me sort of more aware that regulation of crypto exchanges isn't necessarily crypto regulation in any way. It's like regulation of DeFi is 100% is a thing, but centralized exchanges, like I'm actually more like confident that we need better regulation over those exchanges, showing how the lack of transparency is just there. I know Binance is doing some interesting thing with kind of Merkle trees now to be able to do the sort of proof of liabilities and reserves. I think that's great. We're starting to see some blockchain technology within the exchange there. But for the most part, like we almost like we're not learned anything over the last 10 years. And we're just happy to trade on these exchanges that once you deposited funds, those funds may not even be there anymore. Like in terms of a Ponzi scheme, FTX was kind of exactly that. You think that you're trading your assets, and then you try to withdraw them and realize that they're not there.
Yeah, you know what? I think to be very real, and I think as traders or anyone who hold any form of cryptocurrency, I think you have to understand that every exchange have that they have that risk involved, right? Even some of the biggest exchanges, I'm sure, even if they make the claim that it's like, hey, we're 100% one-to-one backed, that's not how the exchange business runs, right? I mean, it's more about their proportion. Maybe they're running at 10%, 10% or of their like entire balance sheet, or 5% of the balance sheet. That's how they manage risk, right? So if majority of the clients end up deciding pulling the money out, they can still facilitate that those trades, those withdrawals. But it's very normal for exchanges to have like 5 to 10%, like just to so that they grow that business, they use it for market making, they use it for other things too, right? So but then if you want a 100 1-to-1, then a lot of these I think all of those changes, one obviously I think it'll be handpicked by the government. So I think if China were to launch a crypto exchange, 100% be run by the government. And there would be, initially, I think there's going to be a trust level. There's going to be a trust issue, and so liquidity will not be as competitive as like all the other crypto exchanges. But then as the industry develop, I think that's where people start to realize that it's like, hey, I think credibility is more important. I think the fact that these guys are backed by the government, or these exchanges are backed by the government, makes me feel comfortable putting money there.
Yeah, I mean, and say there's and there's always DeFi. Do you know what I mean? I feel like people are these kind of hybrid approaches to some exchanges where they offering DeFi products through a centralized mechanism. I think it's just really highlighting that if you want to use DeFi, use DeFi. If you want to use CeFi, use CeFi, but understand that they are different. And
they are different, 100%.
Yeah, and the slight improvement in user experience potentially of, I don't know, like staking your Ethereum on Binance compared to staking it on Lido, like it might be a little bit easier to use, but it's a very different experience than what you're actually doing, because you've got double counterparty risk there. You've got Binance and you've got Lido.
Yes. I think that also depends on, I think CZ also mentioned this, which is even though everyone suggests to use say hardware wallet, or there's certain practices in our industry that obviously that are relatively much more safer, like a lot safer, even like trading, even like wallets, all the infrastructures, right? The fact is, I think a lot of people are still very new to crypto.
100%. And it's not right for everyone.
Yeah. So
Like,
people are lazy too.
Yeah, but also like you've also got the fact of the amount of responsibility you're taking on yourself, because you're taking on the responsibility to keep that private key safe from flood, fire, just there's so many like robbery. There's a million things that you are now responsible for your wealth,
Right.
and some people will just never want that. In all honesty,
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
I do
Exactly.
think that's an area that I think we need more innovation in. How you manage private keys, how we can do better forms of like just private key hygiene, I think, is an area that we still need better solutions to across all chains. So to wrap up this first episode of Slate Asia that I've enjoyed thoroughly, I wanted to ask, are there any projects or events coming up in the next 2 weeks? So because this is going to be a bi-weekly podcast, everyone, so we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. So ahead of that, is there anything coming up in the market or sort of events in the market within the Asian markets that you think are worth keeping an eye out for investors or builders?
Yeah. So there is a event that's coming up in Taiwan, in
Mm-hmm.
Taipei. It's called Taipei Blockchain Week. I think that's on the 12th until the 17th. And then there's also Taipei NFT, which is on the 15th and 16th.
Okay, cool.
And so those two events I think will be relatively decent. Like given especially we're seeing a lot of events going on. But I think Taiwan will be interesting because there's an opportunity for people to kind of discuss the impact that FTX had on the Taiwanese
Mm,
economy, community there. But also, I think it's also a time for people to kind of like come together and to kind of share the experience because I think a lot of people, from what I heard, a lot of people borrow money and then just stake that money in FTX to get the
ouch.
interest rate.
Mm,
Yeah, and that was a pretty popular route in Taiwan. So
yeah. Yeah, interest rate arbitrage was definitely a thing that was appealing, wasn't it? I mean, I
yeah,
definitely had a dabble with that myself in 2021 before I was like, what am I doing here? This is not a smart move.
right.
Because one's a very volatile asset and one's not. And yeah, we were massively frothy in
Yeah,
2021.
we'll
Okay.
definitely hear more stories. Yeah, I'll keep you
Mm.
guys posted.
Yeah, definitely. Well, have a great time at the events. And in a couple of weeks' time, guys, we'll be back for the next episode of Slate Asia, where me and Jason will be going through any of the happenings that's going on in the Asian markets and try and get you some alpha. So obviously, this is aimed more at people in the Western audience that aren't aware of what's going on in the Asian markets. But say if you're in Asia as well, you're more than welcome to join us on this podcast. And if you've got anything you'd like to ask us about, drop it in the comments and we can pick up in the next episode. But until then, I've been Akiba from CryptoSlate. And Jason, do you want to sign us off?
Yeah, thanks for if there's anything else, I guess that's interesting that the community wants to like ask or like bring up. I think we can always talk about those topics in the next episode as well.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, guys, catch you later and see you in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye.